The morning it started, I remember the kitchen being unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet, just empty. I opened the refrigerator door the way I always did, half awake, expecting to see the same things I had bought the night before. Eggs, vegetables, leftover pasta, a whole pizza I had saved for today. Instead, the fridge was almost completely empty. Not messy, not disorganized, just empty. There was a single bottle of soy sauce sitting in the corner of the shelf, and a carton of milk someone had already opened. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space where everything else had been, because the night before, I had filled the entire fridge. I remember it clearly. It was late, almost midnight. I had come back from the grocery store carrying 2 heavy bags and thinking the same small thought I always had when I stocked the fridge. Now I don't have to worry about food for the rest of the week. Back then, that apartment felt simple, quiet, predictable. I closed the fridge slowly. For a second, I wondered if I had made a mistake. Maybe I had put the groceries somewhere else. Maybe I had imagined buying more than I did. But then I heard a voice from the living room, and the sound of a pizza box opening. I stepped out of the kitchen. She was sitting on the couch, cross-legged, completely comfortable, like she had lived there forever. The pizza box was open in front of her. Only one slice left. She looked up at me casually, holding the slice in her hand. "Morning," she said. Then she took a bite. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the pizza, then at her, then back at the empty kitchen behind me. She followed my eyes and shrugged, like it was obvious, like it didn't need explaining. "You should actually thank me," she said. I blinked. What she gestured toward the kitchen with the pizza slice. "I'm helping you clean out the fridge." She said it lightly, like a joke, but she didn't laugh. For a moment, I just stood there, still half asleep, still trying to figure out if this was some kind of misunderstanding. I had only been living with her for 2 weeks. 2 weeks wasn't long enough to fully understand someone. And honestly, at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. Food could be replaced. Groceries were groceries. I told myself something simple. Maybe she thought it was shared. Maybe that was normal for some roommates. Maybe I had forgotten to explain. So I nodded slowly. "Next time, just ask." "Okay." She took another bite. Sure, that was it. No apology. No embarrassment. Just another bite of pizza. I went back into the kitchen and opened the fridge again. Still empty. The light inside flickered softly. The cold air drifted out into the quiet apartment. At the time, it didn't feel like the beginning of a problem. It felt like a small inconvenience. One of those tiny things that happen when you start living with someone new. People forget boundaries sometimes. People misunderstand things. You adjust. You talk about it. It gets better. At least, that's what I believed. But over the next few weeks, something strange started happening. First it was food. Then it was something else. Then something bigger. And before I fully understood what was happening, the apartment I had been living in for 3 years no longer felt like my home. Because a few weeks after that morning in the kitchen, she started saying something new. She started looking around the apartment, looking at my bedroom door, looking at the hallway, looking at the walls. And one evening she said something that felt much stranger than the empty fridge ever did. She said, "Your room is way bigger than mine." At the time, I still believed something simple. I believed that problems between roommates could always be solved with a conversation, with patience, with a little compromise. I really believed that. Back then, I still thought everything could be fixed. I just didn't realize yet the missing food had only been the beginning. Before she moved in, my life in that apartment was quiet. Not lonely quiet, just calm. The kind of quiet that comes from routine. I had been living there for almost 3 years. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of an older building. Nothing fancy. The carpet was a little worn. The kitchen cabinets creaked when you opened them. and the bathroom light buzzed faintly every time it turned on. But it was comfortable. And more importantly, it was predictable. I work from home as a freelance designer. Most days started the same way. Coffee, laptop, a few hours of work while the morning sunlight came through the living room window. Around noon, I'd take a break, make something simple in the kitchen, and go back to work. No noise, no chaos, just space to think. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, one slightly larger than the other. Mine was the bigger one, not by much, just enough to fit a desk near the window and still have room for a bed and a small bookshelf. When I first signed the lease, the landlord had pointed it out casually. "This room's a little bigger," he said, tapping the doorframe. "So the person who signs the lease gets this one." That person was me. It was written clearly in the agreement. Room A, primary tenant. Room B, secondary tenant. At the time, it didn't matter much. My old roommate had taken the smaller room without a problem. He was rarely home anyway. And when he moved out for a job in another city, the transition was simple. For a few weeks, I lived alone, and honestly, I enjoyed it. But rent in that area wasn't cheap, and paying for the entire apartment by myself didn't make much sense long term. So eventually, I did what most people do. I posted an ad online looking for a new roommate. The responses came quickly. A lot of people were interested, but most of them didn't feel like a good fit. Some wanted to bring pets, some worked night shifts, some seemed unpredictable. Then she messaged me. Her name was Lena. Her message was short, polite, simple. She said she had just moved to the city and needed a place temporarily while she figured things out. She wrote, "I'm quiet, clean, and easy to live with." Those 3 words sounded perfect. Easy to live with. When we met for the first time, she seemed exactly like that. Friendly, confident, relaxed. She walked through the apartment slowly, looking around the living room and kitchen with interest. "This place is really nice," she said. I shrugged. "It's old, but it works." She laughed. "I've lived in worse." We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Nothing complicated. She asked about the neighborhood, about the internet speed, about the laundry room downstairs. And when she looked at the smaller bedroom, she nodded immediately. "This is fine," she said. "No problem." She didn't ask about my room. She didn't compare sizes. She didn't question anything. If anything, she seemed grateful. Before she left, she said something that made the decision easy. "I probably won't stay long," she said. "Just a few months until I find something more permanent." A few months, that sounded perfect. Short, simple, low risk. So 2 days later, she moved in. The first few days were normal. She unpacked her boxes, arranged her room, put a few plants on the windowsill in the living room. She was friendly when we passed each other in the kitchen. Sometimes we talked briefly. Sometimes we didn't. Nothing felt strange. Nothing felt uncomfortable. If anything, I remember thinking I had gotten lucky. Some roommates create tension immediately, but she seemed easygoing, relaxed, independent, which is exactly what I wanted. And for the first week, everything felt normal. Then the groceries started disappearing. At first, I told myself it was probably a misunderstanding. Then it happened again, and by the second week, I realized something strange was happening inside my own kitchen, because every time I opened the refrigerator, there was a little less food inside. And the strange part wasn't just that the food was disappearing. It was the way she reacted when I noticed, like it wasn't a problem at all, like it was something completely normal. At that point, I still believed the same thing I always believed. If something feels uncomfortable, you talk about it, you fix it, you move on. And honestly, I thought that's exactly what would happen. I thought the problem would end with a simple conversation, but I didn't know yet. that the missing food wasn't really the problem. The missing food was just the first sign that something much bigger was about to start. And the moment I realized that was the night I caught her eating my dinner. The first time I caught her eating my food, it was late, almost 10 at night. I had spent the entire day working on a project that had taken longer than expected. My eyes were tired from staring at the screen. And I remember thinking about one thing the whole evening. Dinner. Not cooking dinner, just heating something up. The pasta I had made the night before was sitting in the refrigerator. I had even packed it into a container so I could grab it quickly between meetings. It was one of those small things you look forward to after a long day. Something simple, something predictable. So I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and the container was gone. At first, I assumed I had moved it. Maybe I left it on the counter earlier. Maybe I had already eaten it and forgotten. It sounds ridiculous now. But when something small disappears from your routine, your brain tries to find explanations before it accepts the obvious one. I checked the counter. Nothing. I opened the fridge again. Still nothing. Then I heard the microwave beep in the living room. I stepped out of the kitchen. She was sitting on the couch again. Same relaxed posture. Same casual energy. Except this time she was holding a bowl. My bowl, and inside it was my pasta. She looked up and smiled. "Oh hey," she said casually. I stood there for a second. "You took that from the fridge." She nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah." I waited for the rest of the sentence. Maybe an explanation. Maybe a sorry. But instead, she just took another bite. So I said it slowly. "That was my dinner." She tilted her head slightly. "But you're always working," she said. "Figured you wouldn't mind." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Because the tone of her voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't embarrassed. It was casual, like she was borrowing a pen. I sat down in the chair across from her. "Look," I said calmly. "I don't mind sharing sometimes, but just ask first." She nodded quickly. "Sure." Another bite. Conversation over. And honestly, I thought that was it. Problem solved. The next morning, I went grocery shopping again. This time, I bought more food. Extra snacks. Extra meals. Because now, there were two of us. It seemed fair. But 2 days later, the fridge was empty again. Not completely empty, but empty enough that I noticed immediately. Eggs were gone. The yogurt pack I had bought the day before was gone. Even the leftover pizza from dinner had disappeared. So that evening, I tried something simple. I took a marker and wrote my name on a few containers. Just a small note. Daniel. Nothing aggressive. Nothing dramatic. Just a clear signal. The next morning, the labels were gone. Not scratched off. Not peeled halfway. Completely removed. Like they had never been there. And the food was gone too. I stood in the kitchen staring at the shelf where everything had been. Then I heard the refrigerator close behind me. She had walked in quietly. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "You're up early." I turned around slowly. "Did you take the yogurt?" She leaned against the counter. "Yeah." I waited. No explanation. No hesitation. Just that one word. So I asked another question. "Did you see my name on it?" She shrugged. "Roommates share things." There it was again. That sentence. Like a rule she had invented. And suddenly, something about it felt different. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a pattern. And patterns don't stop unless something changes. So that afternoon I drove to an electronics store. Not for a laptop. Not for headphones. For something much simpler. A mini fridge. The kind college students keep in dorm rooms. Small. Compact. Just big enough for a few meals and drinks. When I carried it into the apartment, she was sitting in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She looked up immediately. "What's that?" "A fridge," I said. She laughed. "I can see that." I carried it down the hallway into my room, plugged it in next to my desk. Then I went back to the kitchen and gathered the groceries I had just bought. One by one. I moved them into the mini fridge. Milk, eggs, leftovers, vegetables, everything. She watched the whole process from the doorway, her expression slowly changing, from curiosity to annoyance. When I closed the mini fridge door, she finally spoke. "Wow." I looked up. "That's kind of selfish." I leaned back in my chair. How she crossed her arms. "You're literally hiding food from your roommate." I took a breath. "I'm just keeping the food I buy." She rolled her eyes slightly. "Whatever." And then she walked away. For the first time since she moved in, the kitchen was quiet again. That night I made dinner, put the leftovers into my mini fridge, closed my bedroom door. And the next morning, for the first time in 2 weeks, my food was still exactly where I left it. No missing containers, no empty shelves, just quiet. Problem solved. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because the food stopped disappearing. But something else started changing. Over the next few days, I noticed something strange. She began spending more time in the hallway, looking toward my room. Sometimes she would stand there for a second before walking back into the living room, like she was measuring something, calculating something. And one evening, as we passed each other near the kitchen, she stopped, looked down the hallway toward my bedroom, then looked back at me, and said something that would start the next problem. "Your room is way bigger than mine." The first time she said it, I didn't think much about it. "Your room is way bigger than mine." It sounded like a casual observation, the kind people say without really meaning anything by it. We were both standing in the hallway that evening. I had just come out of the kitchen with a cup of tea, and she was leaning against the wall, scrolling through her phone. She glanced toward my bedroom door, then back at me. "Your room is way bigger than mine," she repeated. I shrugged. "Yeah, a little." She didn't say anything else, just nodded slowly. At the time, I assumed the conversation was over, but over the next few days, the comments started appearing again. Not directly, not aggressively, just quietly, like a small thought she kept bringing back into the room. One afternoon, she said it while we were both in the kitchen. "It must be nice having all that space." Another time, she said it while talking to someone on the phone in the living room. "My roommate has this huge room, and I'm stuck in the small one." I pretended not to notice, because technically, she wasn't wrong. My room was bigger, not dramatically bigger, but enough that if you compared them side by side, you would see the difference. Still, the agreement had been clear from the beginning. I signed the lease. That room was assigned to me, and when she first saw the apartment, she hadn't cared at all. Or at least, that's what I thought. A week after the mini fridge arrived, I came home from the grocery store again. 2 bags of food. Routine. Predictable. I stepped into the hallway and froze. My bedroom door was open. That wasn't unusual. But what was unusual was her standing inside my room, holding a tape measure. She was stretching it across the wall near my desk. For a second, I just stood there watching. She didn't notice me at first. She was focused on the numbers. Then she turned. "Oh," she said. "You're home." I looked at the tape measure. "What are you doing?" She lifted the tape slightly. "Just checking something." Checking what she gestured around the room casually. "I'm seeing if my bed would fit." I blinked. "Your bed." She nodded. "Yeah." I waited for the punchline, but it never came. "So," she continued, looking around thoughtfully, "I think we should switch rooms." For a moment, the apartment felt strangely quiet, not tense, just still, like everything had paused for a second. I set the grocery bags down on the floor. "Switch rooms." "Yeah," she said. "It makes more sense." "How?" She pointed down the hallway toward her room. "My room is tiny. Yours is way bigger." I crossed my arms. "That's the room I signed for." She waved her hand dismissively. "But that's not really fair, though." I stared at her. "Fair, yeah." She leaned against my desk like we were discussing something obvious. Why should you get the big room just because you moved in first? I didn't answer immediately, because the question itself felt strange. The lease had been clear. The agreement had been clear, but somehow she was speaking like none of that mattered. Like the entire situation was open for renegotiation. So I said it as calmly as I could, because it's written in the lease. She said, "You're being really rigid about this." I bent down and picked up the grocery bags again. "It's not rigid. It's just the agreement." She didn't argue after that. She just shrugged and walked out of the room. Conversation over, at least on the surface. But something had shifted, because after that day, she started talking about the room constantly. Not always to me. Sometimes to her friends, when they visited. Sometimes on the phone. Sometimes just out loud while we were both in the apartment. My roommate has this massive room. It's like twice the size of mine. I don't even understand why he needs that much space. The strange part was the way she said it. Like she was slowly building a case. Like she was convincing herself of something. One night a friend of hers came over. They sat in the living room talking while I worked in my room. The walls in that apartment were thin. I could hear almost everything. At one point her friend asked, "So why don't you just switch rooms with him?" And she laughed. "I'm working on it." That sentence stayed in my head. I'm working on it. A few days later, she brought it up again. Directly. We were both in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter and said, "Have you thought about the room thing?" I didn't even look up. "There's nothing to think about. You're being stubborn." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just following the lease." That's when I realized the conversation wasn't going to stop. So the next day, I printed the lease. Every page. I highlighted the section that described the rooms. Room A, primary tenant. Room B, secondary tenant. That evening I placed the document on the kitchen table. She walked in a few minutes later and looked down at it. "What's this?" "The lease." She flipped through the pages. I pointed at the highlighted section. "That's the room assignment." She read it silently. Her expression didn't change much, but something in her posture shifted. Not defeat, just irritation. Finally, she dropped the papers back on the table. "Fine," she said. Conversation over. For the next few days, she didn't mention the room again. Not once. The hallway felt normal again. The apartment felt quiet again. And slowly, I started to believe something comforting, that the problem was solved. Food was no longer disappearing. The room conversation had stopped. Maybe we had finally reached some kind of balance. Maybe things would stay calm from now on. But problems like that rarely disappear. Sometimes they just change shape. And one evening, while we were both sitting in the living room, she looked up from her phone and said something new. Something that sounded harmless at first. "My brother needs a place to stay for a few days." At that moment, I had no idea that sentence would change the entire apartment, because the room war was over. But the next problem was about to be much bigger, and this time, it wouldn't just involve the two of us. The night she mentioned her brother, it sounded small, almost forgettable. We were both sitting in the living room. I had my laptop open, finishing up a design revision for a client. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Then, without looking up, she said it. "My brother needs a place to stay for a few days." I remember pausing my typing, just for a second. Not because it sounded like a big deal, but because something about the way she said it felt casual. Too casual. "A few days?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just temporary." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "What happened?" She shrugged. "He's between places." That was all the explanation she gave. No long story. No details. Just between places. And honestly, I didn't see a reason to say no. People need help sometimes. Friends crash on couches. Family members stay for a few nights. It happens. So I nodded. "Okay. A few days is fine." She smiled immediately. "Thanks." And just like that, the decision was made. Her brother arrived the next afternoon. Tall guy. Quiet. He carried a backpack and one large duffel bag. He didn't say much when we met, just a short nod. "Hey." Then he walked straight into the living room and dropped his bag next to the couch. That night, he slept there. I remember waking up around midnight to grab water and seeing him stretched across the sofa with a blanket. It felt temporary, like someone staying at a friend's place for a weekend. Nothing unusual. The first few days passed quietly. He spent most of his time on his phone. Sometimes he left the apartment during the day. Sometimes he didn't. But he wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive. So I told myself it was fine. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. And the couch was still occupied. One evening, I asked her casually in the kitchen, "So, how long is your brother staying?" She opened the fridge, grabbed a drink. "Just a little longer." "How long is a little?" She shrugged. "He's still figuring things out." I didn't push further. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Because at that point, I still believed the situation would resolve itself. But about a week later, the front door opened again. I was working in the living room that afternoon when I heard voices in the hallway. 2 voices. Her voice and another one I didn't recognize. Then, she walked into the apartment with a woman behind her. "This is my sister," she said casually. Her sister smiled politely. "Hi." I looked at Lena. Then at the hallway. "Is she visiting?" "Yeah," Lena said quickly. "Just for a little while." The same phrase again. Just for a little while. Her sister rolled a suitcase into the apartment. Not a small suitcase. A full one. With wheels. The kind people bring when they're staying somewhere longer than a weekend. She parked it near the wall beside the couch, right next to her brother's duffel bag. And just like that, the living room changed. 2 bags. 2 people. 2 temporary guests. That night the couch was no longer enough. Her brother took the sofa. Her sister slept on the floor with a blanket. The apartment suddenly felt crowded. But again, I told myself the same thing. Temporary. Just temporary. A few days passed. Then one morning, something strange happened. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, and someone was already there. A woman I had never seen before. She stood at the stove, stirring something in a pan. For a moment, I thought I had walked into the wrong apartment. Then Lena walked in behind me. "Oh," she said, "that's my mom." Her mom turned and smiled warmly. "Good morning." I stood there quietly for a second. Then I looked at Lena. "Your mom?" "Yeah. She's staying for a bit." The words "for a bit" sounded strangely familiar, like I had heard them before, and suddenly something inside my chest tightened slightly. Because now the apartment had me, Lena, her brother, her sister, and her mother. 5 people. In a 2-bedroom apartment, the living room had transformed into a temporary sleeping area. Blankets folded near the couch, suitcases near the wall, extra shoes by the door. The quiet apartment I had lived in for 3 years felt completely different. I started noticing small things. The bathroom was always occupied. The kitchen was busy at random hours. The living room TV was almost always on. Even the air in the apartment felt heavier somehow. And the fridge. The fridge was empty again. Not once. Not twice. Every day. Groceries I bought in the morning were gone by evening. It felt like the entire apartment was running through food faster than I could replace it. One night I opened the refrigerator and stared at the empty shelves again. Just like that first morning, except this time it wasn't one person. It was 4. And standing there in the kitchen, I had a strange realization. I no longer felt like the person who lived there. I felt like a guest. In my own apartment, but the moment that really changed everything came a few days later. I was walking up the stairs outside the building when I heard voices from the hallway. 2 neighbors talking. They were standing near the entrance to my apartment door, and one of them said something that made me stop. She said the apartment belongs to her. I slowed down. The other neighbor asked, "Really?" "Yeah." The first one replied, "She told me she just moved into her place. Her place. I stood there quietly in the stairwell for a moment, listening, because suddenly, the situation didn't feel temporary anymore, and the next thing I did was something I had avoided doing since the beginning. I pulled out my phone and called the landlord. I stood there in the stairwell for a few seconds after hearing that. She said the apartment belongs to her. The sentence didn't sound loud. It didn't sound dramatic, but it stayed in my head longer than it should have. Because up until that moment, everything that had happened still felt temporary, uncomfortable, annoying, but temporary. People overstayed sometimes. Boundaries got blurred. Things got messy, but they went back to normal eventually. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But hearing that she was telling other people the apartment was hers changed something. Because that wasn't temporary. That wasn't confusion. That was something else. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. For a second, I hesitated, because calling the landlord felt like escalation, like crossing a line I had been avoiding. Up until now, I had handled everything quietly. The food, the room, the extra people. I had tried to solve each problem myself, calmly, privately, without creating conflict. But now, this wasn't just about comfort anymore. This was about something bigger. So I dialed his number. He picked up after a few rings. "Hey, Daniel," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked at my apartment door, then back down the hallway. "Yeah, I just had a quick question about the lease." "Sure." I took a breath. "How many people are allowed to live in the apartment?" There was a short pause on the other end. "2," he said. "Why?" I stared at the door. There was noise inside. Voices. Movement. "I just wanted to confirm," I said. Another pause. Then his tone shifted slightly. "Is everything all right over there?" I hesitated again. Just for a second. Because this was the moment where I either stayed quiet or said something. I could have brushed it off, said everything was fine, waited, hoped things would fix themselves. But I already knew the answer. They wouldn't. So I said it. "There are more people staying here." Silence. Then, how many? I looked at the door again. Counted in my head. 5 total. Another silence. Longer this time. "That's not allowed," he said, finally. "I know." "Since when?" "A couple of weeks." His voice became more serious. "I wasn't informed about this." I figured. Another pause. Then he asked, "Are they on the lease?" "No." "Are they paying rent?" "I don't think so." He exhaled slowly. "All right." There was a shift now. A different kind of conversation. More direct. "I need to come by and take a look," he said. "When are you available?" I checked the time. "It's fine, anytime. I'll stop by tonight." Tonight. That word landed heavier than I expected. "Okay," I said. We hung up. I stood there in the stairwell for a few seconds longer. Then I walked toward the door. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel unsure. I didn't feel hesitant. I just felt clear. I opened the door. The apartment was exactly as I left it. Crowded. Her brother was on the couch, watching something on his phone. Her sister was sitting on the floor, folding clothes. Her mom was in the kitchen, cooking, and Lena was standing near the hallway. She looked up when I walked in. "Hey," she said. I nodded. "Hey." Nothing felt different on the surface, but everything felt different inside. Because now there was a line, a clear one, and I had finally crossed it. Over the next few hours, I noticed things I hadn't fully paid attention to before. Not because they were new, but because I had stopped ignoring them. The electricity bill, sitting on the counter, higher than usual. Much higher. The trash bin filling up faster. The bathroom always occupied. The kitchen never empty. The fridge constantly cleared out. Not just by one person, but by all of them. It wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It was unsustainable. And more importantly, it wasn't what I agreed to. That evening, I didn't say anything. I didn't argue. I didn't bring up the landlord. I just waited. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't try to fix the situation myself. I let it move towards something else. Something final. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock on the door. The room went quiet for a second. Lena looked up. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. I stood up. "Yeah." I walked to the door and opened it. The landlord was standing there. Same calm expression. Same neutral tone. "Hey," he said. "Come in," I replied. He stepped inside slowly, and immediately, you could feel the shift in the room. Because suddenly, this wasn't a private situation anymore. This wasn't just between me and her. This was something official, something real. His eyes moved across the apartment. The couch, the extra bags, the people, the kitchen, the hallway. He didn't say anything at first. He just observed. Lena stepped forward. "Hi," she said quickly. "I'm Lena." He nodded slightly. "I know who you are." That sentence landed differently. Short, direct. No small talk. No friendliness. Just acknowledgement. He turned to me briefly, then back to her. "How many people are currently staying here?" he asked. Lena hesitated, just for a second. Then she smiled. "Just family. They're only here temporarily." Her voice was calm, confident, like she had already decided this wasn't a problem. But the landlord didn't react to the explanation. He just said one thing. "This unit is leased for 2 tenants." Silence. You could feel it settle into the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Because for the first time, the situation wasn't something you could explain away. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary. It was clear. And it was real. I stood there quietly, not saying anything, not needing to, because for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't the one trying to fix it. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being ignored. And in that moment, I realized something simple. All those weeks of staying quiet, of trying to avoid conflict, of hoping things would fix themselves, had led to this exact point. The point where everything had to be addressed. Out loud, clearly, with consequences. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that anymore. Because now, I knew exactly what was at stake. If I stayed silent, I would lose my home. And that wasn't something I was willing to risk anymore. No one spoke for a few seconds. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The landlord stood in the middle of the living room. Calm. Observant. Letting the reality of the situation sit in the air. 5 people. 2 bedrooms. 1 lease. Lena shifted her weight slightly. Then she tried again. "They're just staying for a bit," she said. "It's not permanent." Her tone was softer now, less confident, but still trying to hold control. The landlord didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just asked one question. "How long have they been here?" Another pause. Lena glanced briefly at her brother, then at her sister, then at her mom. "Not long," she said. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because the apartment itself was already answering for her. The bags, the blankets, the crowded space, the kitchen that never rested, the fridge that never stayed full. The landlord nodded slowly. Then he spoke. "This lease is for 2 tenants. Clear. Simple. Final. No emotion in it. Just fact." Lena took a step forward. "But we're not causing any problems," she said quickly. "We're clean. We're quiet. We're just trying to figure things out." He looked at her. Steady. Unmoved. "That's not the issue." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. "The issue is that this unit is being occupied beyond the agreement." Silence again. Her brother looked down at his phone. Her sister stopped folding clothes. Her mom stood still in the kitchen. For the first time since all of this started, no one was acting like this was normal anymore. Lena's voice changed, a little sharper now. "So what are you saying?" The landlord didn't hesitate. I'm saying this needs to be corrected. The air in the room shifted again. Tighter, more serious. What does that mean? She asked. It means, he said calmly, that anyone not on the lease needs to vacate the unit. The words settled slowly, one by one. No confusion, no interpretation, just clear. Her eyes widened slightly. All of them? Yes. And what about me? She asked. He paused for a second, then answered. You're also in violation of the lease. That was the moment everything changed. Emotional peak #3. Because up until then, she still believed she could control the situation, that she could explain it, adjust it, talk her way through it. But now, that control was gone. This is ridiculous, she said. Her voice was louder now. This is temporary. You're overreacting. The landlord remained calm. I'm not overreacting. I'm enforcing the lease. She turned toward me. For the first time that night, her focus shifted completely. You called him. I held her gaze. Yes, the word was simple, but it carried everything. Weeks of silence, weeks of frustration, weeks of being pushed out of my own space. Her expression changed. Not surprised, not confused, just annoyed. You could have just talked to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I did. She opened her mouth, then stopped, because we both knew it was true. The food, the room, the people, every step of the way. I had tried to handle it, quietly, directly, and every time it had only gotten worse. The landlord spoke again. You have two options, he said. His tone was still calm, still controlled, but very clear. Lena turned back toward him. What? Options 1, he said. The additional occupants leave immediately, and the lease returns to compliance. And 2, he looked at her. You terminate your tenancy. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then her brother stood up, slowly, picked up his bag, didn't say a word. Her sister followed, quiet. Her mom turned off the stove. The apartment began to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like something unwinding. Lena stood in the middle of it all, watching, processing, realizing this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a consequence. She looked at me one last time. You really did this, she said. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to explain. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about something much simpler. My space, my home, my boundaries. And for the first time, I wasn't stepping back from that. Within an hour, the apartment started to empty. Bags were carried out. Shoes disappeared from the doorway. The living room slowly returned to what it used to be. Quiet, open, still. Her brother left first. Then her sister. Then her mom. Each of them passing through the door without much conversation, without resistance, because at that point, there wasn't anything left to argue. Lena was the last one still standing there. She looked around the apartment, then at me, then back at the landlord. I'll pack my things, she said quietly. No attitude, no argument, just acceptance. And just like that, the situation that had been building for weeks ended. Not gradually, not quietly, but all at once. Later that night, the apartment was silent again. No voices, no movement, no tension, just quiet. The same quiet I had before all of this started. I walked into the kitchen, slowly, almost expecting something to be different, but it wasn't. The counter was clear, the sink was empty, and the refrigerator was full, not overfilled, not messy, just normal. I opened the door. Cold air drifted out, shelves lined with food exactly where I had left it, untouched. For the first time in weeks, nothing was missing. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it, because it wasn't really about the food anymore. It was about something else, something I hadn't understood at the beginning, something I had tried to avoid for too long. The cost of staying silent, and the moment you realize, silence doesn't protect peace. It only delays the moment you have to fight for it. I closed the fridge slowly, and the apartment stayed quiet. If you've listened all the way to the end of this story, I just want to say thank you, really. Because stories like this, they're not just about what happened, they're about what it felt like to go through it. And the fact that you stayed means something. Sometimes, when we look back at moments like these, it's easy to focus on the big turning point. The night the landlord showed up, the moment everything finally changed. But the truth is, that wasn't where the story really began. It began much earlier, in small moments, quiet ones, the kind we usually ignore. An empty fridge, a comment brushed off, a boundary left unspoken. And maybe that's the part that matters most, because life doesn't usually break all at once. It shifts, slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you look around, and something that once felt like yours no longer feels that way anymore. For a long time, he believed something simple, that if he stayed calm, if he avoided conflict, if he gave people space, things would work themselves out. And maybe you've felt that too. Maybe you've told yourself, it's not a big deal. I'll deal with it later. I don't want to make things worse. Because sometimes, keeping the peace feels easier than protecting your space. But there's a quiet cost to that. Not all at once, not loudly, just slowly. You give a little, then a little more, then a little more, until one day, you realize you've given away something important. Not just your space, but your sense of belonging inside it. And maybe that's what this story is really about. Not the food, not the room, not even the people, but that moment when you finally realize that silence doesn't protect peace. It only delays the moment you have to stand up for it. Because the truth is, boundaries aren't loud. They're not aggressive. They're not selfish. They're quiet, clear, steady. They don't push people away. They simply show who is willing to respect where you stand. And sometimes, when you finally draw that line, things change. People leave. Situations end. Spaces become quiet again. And at first, that quiet can feel strange, almost unfamiliar, because you've gotten used to the noise, the tension, the constant adjustment. But then something else happens. Slowly, gently, that quiet starts to feel like something else. Not empty, not lonely, but peaceful. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not that everything went back to how it was before, but that something inside him changed. He didn't just get his apartment back. He got something more important, the understanding that his space mattered, that his comfort mattered, that he didn't have to apologize for protecting what was his. And maybe that's something worth holding on to. Because wherever you are right now, whatever your situation looks like, there might be something small in your life that doesn't feel quite right. Something you've been ignoring, something you've been telling yourself isn't worth the trouble. But maybe it is. Maybe it matters more than you think. Not because it's big, but because it's yours. And sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is also the simplest. To say this isn't okay, to mean it, and to stand by it, not with anger, not with force, but with clarity, with calm, with quiet certainty, because in the end, the people who truly respect you won't disappear when you set a boundary. They'll stay, they'll understand, and the ones who don't were never really respecting you to begin with. So if there's one thing to take from this story, maybe it's this. You don't have to wait until everything falls apart to start protecting your space. You don't have to lose something to realize its value. And you don't have to choose between kindness and self-respect. You can have both. And maybe tonight, or tomorrow, or sometime soon, you'll remember this story. not because of what happened, but because of how it felt when everything finally became quiet again. And you'll realize something simple. Peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from knowing when to stop giving away parts of yourself just to keep things comfortable. Thank you for listening. And wherever you are right now, I hope you're in a space that feels like yours. And if not, I hope you find the courage to make it that way. Because sometimes, the most important thing you can protect is not what you have, but what you allow